Okay, we're starting our last chapter here, chapter 7, and it's over compliance security in the cloud. So, we brought up compliance in the previous chapter, and anyone who has worked in a regulated industry can tell you it's a lot of work keeping things in compliance. So, we have security compliance, and then there's other compliance for different areas. We all know about HIPAA with our healthcare records, and then PCI when you're taking a payment card industry. Lots and lots of work goes into compliance. Now, the good news is, as we move into the cloud, all of our cloud providers know that everything, all the software that's been written over the last 25, 30 years has really been working on being compliant. And you want to be sure to be able to plug in what compliant levels you're looking at and what compliance items matter to your company and your industry and be able to use that. So our cloud providers have made these things a lot easier for us to use as we move into the compliance side of things. So, some of our compliance requirements include data sovereignty, regulatory concern, industry based requirements, international standards, and certifications. So, we identify the importance and impacts of compliance in the cloud and explain security concerns, measures, and concepts of cloud operations. So, the first section in Chapter 7 of Compliance and Security in the Cloud has to do with identifying the importance and impacts of compliance in the cloud. So, if you'll start reading on page 225, identify the importance and impacts of compliance in the cloud, you're going to read about how meeting or exceeding compliance requirements demonstrates a commitment to customer as well as regulators. In general, compliance with regulations fall into one of the three areas: activity logging and auditing, encryption and key management, and identity and access control. So, what you're going to find is your cloud service providers have built all the tools to make sure that you can manage this, but it is a shared responsibility. It all fits within, we talked about in chapter 1 or 2, the shared responsibility model. And so, your the chances of breaking into one of the CSPs and having some kind of security event are very, very slim. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's any recorded time of it happening. Now, there have been lots and lots of times where the people who built the tools and put out there left some kind of security hole and allowed somebody in or made something available that they weren't supposed to. But your cloud service providers have people working full time to ensure that they don't add to this type of situation. So, like I said, up till now, someday maybe somebody will figure out some way to hack into Microsoft, to Amazon, to Google. But as of right now, they've hacked into some systems, but it hasn't been anything directly related to any kind of vulnerability from the CSP. Okay, so some of the first things we need to learn, and some of this might just be more like vocabulary to you at this point, but then as you get into it, you're going to learn more and more about it. But we've heard this term, data sovereignty. So, data sovereignty is the idea that data are subject to the laws and governance structure of the nation where they're collected. So, the concept of data sovereignty is closely linked to data security, cloud computing, network sovereignty, and technical sovereignty. So, as we dig deeper into identifying the importance and impacts of compliance in the cloud, some other things we're going to read about in this chapter: regulatory concerns. This is local, state, and federal. And then you have your industry based requirements. These are more like your HIPAA, FEMA, the different types of security items that have to do with regulating an industry. And then we have our international standards. So definitely read through those international standards. You're not going to need them for the exam, but it is still a really good idea to kind of understand what the ISO requirements are. And the main thing that you want to be able to do is to find them. And then if you get into an industry, or if you're interviewing for a job that's in an industry, you want to pull those up and start really trying to study those and to make sure that you do understand them. So our CSPs each have links for their compliance. And again, as I mentioned, our cloud service providers, they do everything they can do to make this easier on you because they know that this is important. And so, as you're migrating your applications into the cloud, this is a great time to start taking care of these things. So, here we have our AWS compliance programs. You can read through here. Again, I'm not going to go through in great detail, but I do want to make sure you know that compliance is so important to these that they have dedicated sites for them and they will teach you how to do it. So, as you see here, AWS has them split up by the global. And again, in your global, those are most of your ISOs. And it was like right here's one that is very specific to cloud specific controls. This is one that I have to keep open and have to learn more about. And it's one that if you move into a cloud side, you're going to need to know this very well, very much as well. So, and then you also have your privacy information management. So again, just knowing where to go to find these is great. And Amazon makes it really easy for you to jump in here and be able to do that. So those are your global. Then we'll look into our Americas. FedRAMP and FISMA and FIPS. These are all government types of controls. And then you have HIPAA. We all know about HIPAA, where that's you've signed HIPAA forms and to let you know how your information is being shared. You also have your NIST controls. Our book refers to NIST a lot. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So this is where you go in if you're looking for the real definition of something. You can use NIST as the backing for your definition. And then you also have these security ones like high trust, zero trust. So anyway, again, and then if you were dealing in Asia Pacific, how nice is it that you can come in here? If your company was starting to work there, you can come right in here and start educating yourself on these as well. All right, that was AWS. Let's take a look at Azure. So Azure compliance, streamline your compliance with Microsoft Azure, the cloud platform leading the industry with more than 100 compliance offerings. So again, you can come in, look at different things in a different way. A lot of these are going to point you to the same type of resources because these, the HIPAA is a control that's not just in one CSP; it's in all CSPs. So again, right here is where you would start your search as you were looking if you're working with Azure. And then let's go to the last one here, Google. So here are our compliance resource center for Google. And then also when I mentioned that the CSPs will help you, right here, Google says contact us. So you can jump right in and let them know what you're looking for, all of your CSPs. If you are using their product, they're going to jump out and help you any way that they can. So they'll take your call. I mean, depending on what type of support you pay for, they may not take it right away, but they'll jump in and help you. And if you ask for help, they're for sure going to help you. So right here are all your ISOs. And then, you can come in and look for global controls. And they have their split out by country. So let's look for United States. And then here are some states even. And then you have your criminal justice type of things. Here's FedRAMP. FedRAMP's going to be, all of them are going to have, so they have all of their government things. Then here's HIPAA. So if you were wanting to play around with these, HIPAA is probably a really good one to jump in and look up all the CSPs and see what they tell you about HIPAA and how they can ensure that they're protecting the data and meeting all of the HIPAA standards. Again, these are just ways that the CSPs try to make it easy for you as you migrate into the cloud. All right, and then I did include something on the slide. You'll read it in your book about net neutrality. This is back, so it's in 2018. It seems longer ago than that. But I guess people were talking about it for years before they actually put in some rules and legislation around this. But in short, they found out that CSPs were putting their product out there and letting people access the internet, but they were slowing it down so that they could sell different tiers. And so the FCC and FTC, they started putting in some regulations that says that internet providers can't just throttle the connection. They can't do things to make your internet slower. in order to sell you a more expensive, faster internet. So just a nice little use case of some compliance in things that we have available to us and things that have happened over the last couple of years. So here's an exam note, and this is very important. So the examples list is not an exhaustive list by any means, and you're not expected to know all the regulations, but these regulations are specific to industries, and unless you work in one of the affected industries, you don't need to know the details about them. We mention them as examples and many regulations that CSPs must work with to introduce the names of regulations that have appeared on exam questions. So the exam will not ask specifics about any of the regulations, but it's important to recognize them by name and know that they are regulations. So what this is saying is you're not going to be tested on this, but you need to kind of understand why we have these out here and what is out there. Some of the exam questions, and you'll see them at the end of the chapter, they get close to asking specifics, but not really asking specifics. But as I mentioned, if you're going to go into an interview and you know that a certain security standard is part of the job, if it's a HIPAA, if it's payment card, PCI, you do want to read up ahead of time, and it will make you you don't want to go in and falsely act like you're an expert. But if they ask you a question, you can say, I'm not really an expert in that, but I was reading that this certain compliance means this, and it will just help them understand that you're the kind of person that can soak up information and be critical part to that team. All right, and then the next thing we're going to talk about here are the government standards. So federal risk. Oh, this is all part of the thing. Sorry, I got to talking about the exam note and forgot about that. Now we're going to go in here and this is not an exhaustive list at all, just a very, very high level list of the things that the book felt was important. And again, like you said, you don't have to memorize these, but it's a good idea to pay attention to these, read about them, and familiarize yourself with them. So Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, or FedRAMP. FedRAMP was established to provide standardized approach for assessing, monitoring, and authorizing cloud computing services under the Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, which we discuss next. So CSPs desiring to sell services to a federal agency must demonstrate FedRAMP compliance either by earning a provisional authority to operate, which is an ATO, from the Joint Authorization Board or the JAB board, they have JAB sessions, or receiving an authority to operate an ATO from a federal agency. So FedRAMP authorizations are granted at 3 impact levels based on the NIST guidelines: low, medium, high. These rank the impact that the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability could have on an organization. Low is limited effect, medium is a serious adverse effect, and high is severe or catastrophic event. And then more on our government standards. We have our Federal Information Security Management Act. That's what we just said we would talk about this. So FISMA. FISMA is a federal law that requires U.S. federal agencies and their partners to procure information systems and services only from organizations that adhere to FISMA requirements. So FISMA requirements control identified by NIST 800-53 Revision 4 and NIST 800-37. We have mentioned NIST previously in the book, so you should be familiar with who they are, mentioning all NIST documents that detail or relate to federal regulations beyond the scope of this book. However, if you're interested in reading further, Table 7.2 contains NIST document numbers and web addresses. If you choose to pursue further certification, specifically in the security field, you will need to become familiar with these. So like I said, none of this for Cloud Essentials, but in the future, you may need to know where these are, and this is just your introduction into these. So here, I don't even know if I should click on these, but we'll go ahead and take a quick look. Here are some of your security controls. Well, that's going to make that easy because it's not even going to come up here. Here's some around risk management. So risk management framework for information systems and organizations, a system lifecycle approach for security privacy. Again, you can jump in here, get started, lots of links. Here you can look at the document history, and it's going to get you a place to start educating yourself on these. Take a quick look at the security framework. Here we just have an introduction into the CFFs, the Cyber Security Framework Center, and again, just a place for you to get started when you're trying to learn about these things. All right, and then let's see, yep, and then here we have our government standards, so FIPS. FIPS is the federal standard that details the security requirements for cryptographic modules that protect sensitive information. Cryptographic modules are hardware devices, usually, but can be software, that are used to encrypt sensitive information. So again, just a little bit of a taste in here. You can come in here and start reading the NIST information on the security requirements for cryptographic modules. Sorry, I keep saying modules. Then we have our industry-based requirements, things like PCI, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, MPAA, GLBA. So here we have our Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. HIPAA so FERPA is like the HIPAA of educational records. And so here we have our cloud service provider HIPAA links, our FERPA links, pardon me. So let's go here and look at the AWS one. So here it just takes you straight to a PDF to let you understand that if you're writing code and putting out into AWS, you're trying to make sure that you're covering the FERPA items. This is a document that you can read to ensure that you not only use tools to build, but also how you can get your authority to operate, and to make sure that you understand everything that it takes to make this actually compliant. Again, we're not reading these right now. I'm just kind of showing them to you. Here's the Azure 404. Here's our Google. So FERPA, student education records are protected under FERPA, the Family Education Rights Privacy Act. And so if you were a Google Cloud user, you can come right in here and start reading about FERPA and understand how to make sure that your system, when you're done with it, is compliant. Next one we have our Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA. Financial regulation that stipulates and outlines the books and record keeping requirements. So let's just jump in and look at our AWS. So getting started, well, that took us to a different link. That took us to the S3 link. But there was probably, if you did some digging in there, you would find out that there are items that are related to FINRA and how you can store them. So let's go to our Azure. Oh, that's interesting. Microsoft must be having an issue today. Regardless, you'll be able to click on these links. You get the slides. As a matter of fact, I don't expect you to get a lot out of this lecture. I think you're probably going to want to dig into this and at least look at it. Again, remember, none of these things are important for the exam. Now we go on to industry-based requirements. So Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, or GLBA, is a U.S. law. Reform the financial services industry and specifically address concerns about protecting consumer privacy. So you can go right into your FTC website and learn about this and read more about it and understand what you have to do to be compliant. Again, if more than likely you'll have a security officer, or maybe you're going to play the role of security officer. If you are, then you're the one that has to get in there and read that. A lot of times, if you're the project manager, the leader, or even an engineer, you build things, but it's up to your information security officer to keep you educated and to ensure that you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. Then right here are more, we're not going to click on these, but here's the AWS link to the GLBA and the Azure. All right, a little more on the industry-based requirements. So Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. HIPAA is the U.S. law that establishes requirements for the use, disclosure, and safeguarding of individually identifiable health information. It applies to covered entities like doctors' offices, hospitals, health insurers, and other healthcare companies with access to patients' protective health information, or PHI, as well as to business associates such as cloud service and IT providers that process PHI on their behalf. So here are the links to the CSP's HIPAA. So let's take a quick look. You know they're going to have, we've already looked at all of these, and we are in each individual CSP. So if you are dealing with HIPAA information, you want to make sure that everyone in your organization, especially if you're building something in AWS, is reading this from this site so that you can ensure that everything you build is HIPAA compliant. So let's take a quick look at the Azure. And really, I think this is probably the best one to judge a CSP on. Like I said, that's funny. I guess I would think that. I can't wait to find out. I bet we'll read tomorrow what happened to Azure and why their site was down today. We have our Google. And again, probably going to find very, very similar information in each of these because, not the CSPs are only providing information about HIPAA. HIPAA is its own entity, and the CSPs are just making sure that if you're using their products, that you know what it takes to ensure that you're remaining compliant. And then here's one that they threw in, which I like because it's a little bit different than the ones that we hear about. Not everybody gets to work with the MPAA, but the Motion Picture Association of America. So MPAA is the association that provides best practices, guidance, and control frameworks to help major studio partners and vendors design infrastructure and solutions to ensure the security of digital film assets. So again, if you're working in this type of industry and you are using Amazon Web Services, you want to come in here, read this, and learn more about it. Now, we're not talking about individual products, but I will tell you that with AWS, they have AWS Artifact. It's a documentation repository. Now, you have to sign in to do it. We're not going to do that now, but it's a documentation repository to where you can go out and pull things about your environment. So you have to sign into your account so you can run reports on your account. It will fill in the gaps where it can with information about everything that you have running. And then it also is a repository for you to go get information about other things that maybe you don't have in your environment. So, anyway, just know that is the compliance helper for AWS. We won't go much into that. And I'm sure this link won't work, but let's take a look. Yep. And the next one we're going to look at is Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX. So Sarbanes-Oxley is a U.S. law that requires publicly traded companies to have proper internal control structures in place to validate that their financial statements accurately reflect their financial results. Sarbanes-Oxley does not just apply to financial institutions, it applies to publicly traded companies. Additionally, there are no SOX compliance certifications. SOX is mainly about reporting, so there are SOX reporting requirements. It is these SOX reporting requirements that CSPs can assist with. So something I always find interesting about Sarbanes-Oxley is it's something that I had to deal with in my working career. It didn't exist one day, and then if you remember the Enron case, they were determining that Enron was not telling their stockholders the appropriate information. They were running stocks up and doing things with it. And it really just came crashing down. So this is some legislation that came out around that time. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2005, maybe a little bit before that. And a lot of things came out of that and a lot of groups came out of that. And everybody that was in IT was impacted by it. So the first thing that they had to do is go in and see if their system had anything to do with the reporting of financial information. And if they did, then they need to make sure that they were SOX compliant. Let's take a quick look at the AWS. And the next one we're going to look at here is international standards. So international standards would be the even bigger list than industry standards if you went to a country by country. So therefore, we won't provide a list of them, but we will provide the link to the global CSP compliance homepages that you can browse. So international standards are going to be specific to you. We can offer assistance and tools that will help you adhere to whatever standards you must comply with. Additionally, we can give you a few examples. So here's one, the CIS, Center for Internet Security. Again, sign into these, play around with them, look at them, and some of them may have to do with the industry that you're working in. Some of them may not, but now you know where to go look and how to start finding these. And then here are your iOS, International Organization of Standardization. We'll just look at the Amazon one. So ISO 9001, 2015 compliance, outlines process-oriented approach to documenting and reviewing the structure, responsibility, and process required to achieve effective quality management within an organization. So again, if you are needing to look over these, when you educate yourself on these, tons and tons of information so that you can come in, talk to other people, speak the talk, be able to have really good conversations about, are you compliant? What do we need to do to be compliant? So here are some that, again, you can look into, but not important for the test. But you know that 27001, this is the Information Security Management Standard. 27017, controlling cloud-based information security. And then 27018, protecting personal data in the cloud. So as you can see, the last two are very specific to cloud. Okay, and then of course the next thing we want to look at is certification. So certification is a testament to the compliance of standards, practices, or regulations by an independent third party. So there are way too many of these to list, but you can go get your compliance. So in order to be compliant, you have to study the rules, make sure that everything you developed was done with compliant, and all the tools that you use to get there were have certified compliance. And so each of your CSPs are going to be certified, and you'll use that and ensure that not only, as I mentioned, not only did you use all certified tools, but you're also going to make sure that everything you built was certified. So even if you use AWS, Microsoft Azure, you build a system, you put it out there, and then you have some homegrown software that you put on top of it. The second you put your test software on top of it, it's no longer certified. You have to go get it recertified. Let's just take a quick look at some of the compliance programs. Oh, we've already looked at this list. But as you can see, lots and lots and lots of things. But you work with these organizations, you determine what it takes to get certified, then you can go get that certification. And the good thing, whenever you do have that certification, what you do with it is you can sell yourself as a certified organization with certified software. So you can use things like, FISMA, FedRAMP, PCI compliant. And so when you're out talking to people, and then here's the other thing, when you're out trying to sell a product and you're working in certain industries, they're going to come to you and say, hey, are you PCI? What have you done to make your PCI compliance? Well, you want to make sure that you don't have the deer in the headlight. You want to have that at your fingertips. So, well, here's what we did to meet that certification. We did this. We got this organization to certify us. It's here. You can call these people. I assure you, we are certified. So the last section we're going to cover in Chapter 7, Compliance and Security in the Cloud, is explain security, concern, measures, or concepts. So one thing we need to talk about here are threats and vulnerabilities. So some key definition points here. All vulnerabilities are threats, but not all threats are vulnerabilities. The key difference is that the vulnerabilities are assigned to a specific asset. So a vulnerability is a threat that has not been mitigated. So something that you're going to see when you move into the cloud is a lot of conversation about denial of service attacks. And the reason this is because if you think about a cloud environment, well, first of all, let me describe what a denial of service attack is. I'm sure you probably have heard of these and but just to make sure, a denial of service is where, like, you have this attacker here and he's logged into this controller and he is sending requests out to these machines that he is controlling or he has created. And he's going to the victim site. Now, the key to this is you're hitting the victim, but one of the things that you can do to really, really mess with a victim is you send it a command that it thinks it needs to respond to, but then make sure it can't find where to send that response. So it starts taking 3 or 4 or 5 seconds with its response, or heck, it depends how they're timing out. It could just be sitting there housing up responses and it can't keep up. So this guy in this example here, the attacker has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 different machines that are beating this up. Well, as we know, within a cloud environment, it's very easy to spin up new machines and duplicate what they're doing. So cloud created the easy way to create a denial of service attack. So all of the CSPs ensure that none of these denial of service attacks are coming through them. So if they suspect anything at all, and of course they can look for it, they have tools. And when you start getting into the cloud, you're going to see all these tools that they have. So the CSPs, if you were on purpose or you were infected and somebody was using your system to create this, the CSPs are going to shut you down in a heartbeat. They're going to see it. They have rules in place. They know that if you spun up 1,000 servers and all they're doing are just simple little attacks, and then you spun up 1,000 more, it's very easy for them to see that and shut it down. So that's one reason that we talk a lot about denial of service, because you don't have to have a lot of knowledge. You don't have to be one of those really, really smart scientific type people to do it. Anybody could create this situation. So they want to ensure that they don't. And then they also create a lot of tools to protect you. So if you're the guy down here that's the victim, that you're going to be able to detect and stop a denial of service attack. So let's take a quick look at this map. This is a map that shows us where attacks are occurring right now. So this is a fun one to play with. There's been, I used to use the Norse map, and there's some others out there, but this one's kind of interesting. So I can sit here and look at the United States, and we can see what type of activity is going on right now. So you can see also, what countries are the most impacted at the moment, who is getting hurt the most. But then if we want to slide in here and take a look at, wonder if that's, let's move that back down. Oh, it's very easy to get around. Let's see what this is right here. Well, they're moving around. Scroll out just a little. But you can come in here and look at different parts of the world and see them. I'm not having much luck right now with this. But you can also get reports. You can pull the data down. You can share the data and you can do things with it. But the thing I'm wanting to point to you the most is how cool it is that we have all of this right now. These are known attacks. These are things that we see that's going on right now, and it's all being stopped. That's the reason we know that these are happening. If there's probably some attacks that we're not quite sure are going on right now, and of course those are the ones that are way more dangerous. So anyway, feel free to come out here and play with this. All right, the next section we're going to talk about here is security assessments. So security assessment is the systematic explanation of an organization's security policies and underlying security controls to see if they're adequate to perform their assigned function. So a couple of things here that we do want to make sure that you know the definition of. I don't know if they're on the exam, but still I would study them like they are. You can look at your key essentials. That'll probably be the best, the exam essentials. That'll be the best way to see what needs to be studied. But these are words that you definitely, if you're working in this industry, you want to know what these are, and you'll want to go in, especially if you're interviewing for a position, after you get your certification, you want to know what these are. So penetration testing. Penetration testing, or pen test, is an exploratory or directed examination of a network or system to achieve one or more of the following goals: information gathering or vulnerability exploitation. So penetration test is just what it sounds like. You try to work from the outside and see if you can penetrate and get into the system and to do things to it once you're there. Then we have our vulnerability scanning. This is probe assets looking for known weaknesses that can be exploited to gain any kind of access. So the goal of vulnerability scans is to identify potential exploits. And then the last one we have here is application scanning. This is scanning for unknown vulnerabilities, manual and peer review process. Source code needs to be reviewed by peers and tested for best coding practices. Then we move in, we talk about our data security. So some of the categories of our data security is public, private, and sensitive. So public, everyone can access; private, authorized access only; sensitive, need to know only. So here in our real world example, it says originally most organizations based their data categorizations on U.S. government model. Prior to 1982, the government had 5-level categorizations: top secret, confidential restricted, confidential, internal, and public. In Executive Order 12356 changed the streamlined classifications to the one shown in this table here. So now they're down to 3: top secret, secret, confidential. So top secret applied to information where the authorized disclose which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. Then we have secret applied to information where the unauthorized disclosure of which would reasonably could be expected to cause serious damage to national security. And then confidential applied to information, the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause damage to national security. Okay, and then the next section here, we talk about our data security. So this has to do with our encryption. Again, you're not going to get asked at this detail. You do need to understand encryption and understand how it works, but we've already kind of talked about that in other chapters. But here are just a few that they've pointed out. 3DES upgraded some symmetric key algorithm that recently been depreciated due to key collision. AES, current standard for symmetric key algorithm used by the U.S. government, and it's one of the few FIPS compliant algorithms. That's AES. Then DES, symmetric key algorithm that's no longer used because of the short key length. Diffie-Hellman, asymmetric key algorithm that is older but still in use. And then key length. So the key length has to do with how big that key has to be. So, when you think of some keys, you might be thinking of like 8 to 12 characters, but actually these are huge. And so you could have a 56-bit key. So it's an entire file that needs to be there in order to decrypt the data once you send it over. So they can go anywhere from 56 bits all the way to 4,096 bits in length. The longer the key, the stronger encryption. Says here that has a minimum of 128 bits, but 256 is better. 128 bits is starting to show its age, and compute power is reaching the point to be able to decrypt any 128 bit in a reasonable amount of time. Now, I know what you're thinking. You think, well, if I try to open up a file that I'm not supposed to after 3 times, it'll lock me out. There are ways around that, actually fairly simple. But you can create that file in multiple locations in order to have a computer sit there and keep cranking and cranking and cranking away until it can figure out. So again, they're talking about the compute power. So it could be trying hundreds of thousands of encryption keys per second in order to finally eventually break them. So they're saying bigger is better. And then RSA, that's asymmetric key algorithm, which is the pseudo standard for most organizations. I think we did, earlier in one of the chapters, we showed a picture of the device that everybody used to have on their keychain. That was their RSA token. And again, even if you have one now on your phone, it looks very, very similar to what we use on those tokens. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the CIA triad. So let's watch a quick video on what the CIA triad is.
It's not the CIA you're thinking of. The CIA triad in information security means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's an organizational model designed to guide information storing policies. Its three elements are considered the three most crucial components of security. Confidentiality is a set of rules that limits access to information. It's comparable to privacy. Ensuring confidentiality means the right people can access sensitive information while the wrong people cannot. This can be accomplished through methods like data encryption, two-factor authentication, and biometric verification. Integrity is the assurance that the information is trustworthy and accurate. It involves maintaining data consistency and accuracy over its entire lifecycle. Measures like file permissions and user access controls ensure that unauthorized people can't change data, while checksums and backups safeguard data from non-human threats, like an electromagnetic pulse or server crash. And availability is the guarantee of reliable access to the information. It's best ensured by rigorously maintaining all hardware and staying up to date with all system upgrades. Providing bandwidth, preventing bottlenecks, and fast disaster recovery are also essential. Big data poses extra challenges to CIA simply because of the sheer volume of information, its sources, and format variety. The Internet of Things also challenges the CIA triad. Unpatched internet-connected devices, often configured with weak passwords, can easily be exploited by bad actors. Even something like a Wi-Fi enabled light bulb could be exploited and used as an attack vector. How does your organization embrace the CIA triad? Let us know in the comments below, and please hit that like button.
All right, so what we want to remember out of that is the CIA part: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality or privacy, simply the assets that are protected from unauthorized assets. The unauthorized assets are both owned and not owned by the organization that owns the asset that is being kept confidential. So we have encryption and sanitation. So encryption is the process of hiding data, such as in a manner that can only be authorized individuals can read the data, and the sanitation is rendering data unusable either digitally or physically. And so you might have heard of this, like if you were throwing away an old computer, you probably have heard that you can't just scrub the data off of the hard drive. It needs to be written and rewritten and then deleted, rewritten, deleted up to 7 times to ensure that no one can get anything off of that hard drive. The next part, the integrity, it's the second principle of CIA triad and is closely related to confidentiality. If an asset is kept confidential, we also need to make sure that it has not been modified or altered. We need to be able to trust that it is accurate and at the state we expect it to be. Then the last part, A, availability. This has to do with our backup and recovery. So backups are mechanisms of making copies of data or assets such as in a manner that they can be retrieved should the parent asset become unavailable or damaged and cannot be repaired. And recovery is the other side of the backup. It entails the copying of data from either a backup, either to the original location or to a separate location. And remember, you do have to test these. You don't want to get in a situation where you've been taking backups of certain things and then find out years later, whenever it's time to recover, that the recovery part doesn't work. Unfortunately, I've been a part of organizations that have seen that happen. So something I always want to caution people of. Make sure that you test your recovery. And this is when we get into our DR testing. And a lot of organizations will do this yearly to ensure that they know that they can take their backups and restore from them. And then, you have a whole different set of studies if you want to get into all of the things with disaster recovery and business continuity. All right, another thing we want to talk about is a breach. So a breach in confidentiality is a breakdown and loss of privacy of data. Depending on either your industry or your regulatory requirements, a breach may have to be publicly disclosed. And there is an ISO standard that requires that customers be informed whether personal information is lost or leaked outside of an organization's control. Currently, there are no federal laws requiring disclosure of data breaches. However, most states have some sort of disclosure requirement. Disclosure may not have been public, but the affected individual needs to be notified. So we've all been in a situation where we got a notification that our credit card was no longer good and they were sending us a new one. Or maybe you're getting a phone call that says, hey, we're, we need to let you know that there was this data breach. And one of the biggest ones that I can remember is back in about 2013, 2014, when Target had a breach and they had to let everybody that purchased something in a certain area time. And of course, it was right before Christmas. And they had to let people know that that had occurred. And so, if anybody wasn't aware of these types of laws before that, they probably were after that because a lot of people were impacted with that. And then also, I brought in the little part of the book about the man in the middle attack. That's an MITM. It's where a third party inserts itself in communication streams between two parties, A and B. A and B think they're communicating with each other, but in reality, the third party is intercepting all communication and forwarding it onto them. This allows the third party to view all communications and even alter them if needed. So here's a really simplified version of a man in the middle attacks. There was a gas station over off of Metcalf and around 95th that got somebody was putting a device in the machine that would read the credit card as it was going through. Well, it would allow the transaction to go through so that no one suspected anything. And then they collected a bunch of credit card numbers and then went back and used them at a later date. So, some creative ideas around things, but also things that we have to be looking out for. All right, and now we talk about the application and the infrastructure security. So, something that I always like to make sure everyone is fully aware of, and I know that everybody is, but it's amazing when you have people that own applications, especially application owners that have been around for many, many years. They think when they move to the cloud that they're getting all this magic security around their things. But applications are no different running in your data center or running in the cloud. You have an additional layer of security that you need to manage. But also with applications, you still have to run your applications the same as you have always. So we have to run audits. So that's like Windows and Unix. We use trails so that we can trail the information. We can put things in a location that if we need to go back and see what was happening at a certain time, we have all of those transactions in a log. And so Cloud Trails for the CSP. So with Amazon, we have something called Cloud Trail, and then we also have Cloud Watch. And so when I'm teaching the AWS course, I tell people Cloud Watch is what's happening right now. Cloud Trail is what happened yesterday. And Cloud Trails last for about 90 days. So anyway, that's a whole different study. We won't get into that. But just know that applications still need to be managed. It's not just because you moved them over to the cloud doesn't mean that you can stop managing them. Some other ones here: access, who can get in, and then authorization, what can they do once they get in there. Then another word to remember here: hardening. This is the process of looking at all threats against assets and the past events to determine a plan of action that will improve the security posture of an organization. A lot has gone into this chapter. You'll not need to know every aspect of this chapter. We introduce you to a wide range of concepts and examples to prepare you for subjects you at least need to be familiar with, but also touch on many other things to meet the needs of a wide range of readers. So we delve deeper into the data sovereignty and the impact that working on a global scale has. And you can't just think of the United States anymore. There are other players that need to be considered. So U.S. regulatory requirements were introduced. These are specific to doing business in the United States, also doing business with any federal agency. Topics include risk management, information security, and information processing requirements. We then moved into the regulations that were industry based. We covered a broad range of privacy like HIPAA and FERPA, and reporting like the GLBA and SOX. We also included record retention like the financial records group, FINRA, and compliance with industry expectations like MPAA. International standards were next topic. We discussed the requirements and frameworks. There's no international body that can impose regulatory requirements, but there are international bodies that provide guidance. CIS benchmarks are recognized as universal benchmarks that help ensure information security. ISO has standards that are the basis of regulations and requirement for other requirements. The first section wrapped up with the certification and links to the CSP's documentation on their certifications that meet regulatory requirements. Not all standard regulations offers are required for certification. The second section, we started revisiting what a threat is. We discussed a distributed denial of service attacks that provide some resources. Vulnerability was the next topic. We introduced very importance of CVE database, which is a free database known for known vulnerabilities are both hardware and software. Security assessments, which are systematic approach to testing security controls in organizations, is placed. We're next. We then moved on to several assessments, including penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, and application scanning. And we introduced several tools that are critical to the security assessment, including Metasploit, WASOP, Nmap, Nessus, and Kai Linux. Security data was a large part of the chapter. We covered the concepts of data categorization. Most organizations use a minimum of 3 categories for data, but some use up to 5 or 6. Then we talked about CIA triad and one of the most important concepts in the security field. If you plan on advancing further in the security realm, you'll need to completely understand these 3. Data encryption and sanitation were covered in regard to confidentiality. With integrity, we need to validate the data, and integrity goes in hand with confidentiality. And the last principle of the CIA triad was the availability, meaning that the need for backups and proper recovery processes that can be validated. We touched on breaches, and then we also discussed in the previous chapter. Moving on from data to application and infrastructure security, we discussed audit, access, authorization, and hardening. Auditing is logging or tracking actions that occur against an asset or by an asset. It's a critical component after a breach has occurred. Access consists of the controls that are placed on protecting a specific asset. Authorization consists of the controls placed on a system as a whole. Rights and permissions play a part in both. And then we finish the chapter with hardening, which is the process of updating and applying changes to an asset to protect against vulnerabilities. Now we're going to jump into our exam essentials. And remember, these are like our flashcards, and it's a great place to see what you know and to see where you need to study. Know what compliance is. Compliance consists of actions an organization takes to be compliant with laws and regulations. These laws and regulations come from the industries the organization is doing business with or the state and country that the organization's business is in. Know what data sovereignty is. Data sovereignty is important to understand the impact when doing business with organizations. Data is stored in one or more places in the cloud. The data location can have an impact on the sovereignty of the data. Data sovereignty deals with the privacy and rights of access of third parties. Know the difference in hierarchy of regulations from local, state, and federal levels. It's important to know how conflicting regulations are to be followed. We give examples of federal regulations from a range of federal agencies. These are to serve as an idea of the requirement that exists required at the federal level. Know the terms and have general understanding of industry-specific regulations. So there'll be questions on the exam that mention the terms that are industry-specific. You don't need to know the details of the regulations, but you do need to recognize the terms as regulations. Additionally, you need to have a sense of the type of regulations that will be required whenever it's security or reporting. Know the international standards are the basis of other regulations. So CIS benchmarks are used as test benchmarks for regulations at both the international and national levels. Be familiar with the terms and that they cover most forms of technology used today. Know that ISO is the organization that sets many of the regulations discussed previously. They are standards for privacy, security in the cloud. Know the certifications are an important part of the regulatory compliance. Certifications are proof that an organization has been able to demonstrate to a third party that they can fulfill the requirements for regulations. They need to be renewed on a regular basis and require investment of resources by an organization. Know what a threat is and be able to identify one. Threats can come in many different forms, but a DDoS is one of the most common. Know that threats have many different parts and include not just loss or damage of an asset. Impaired functionality or reduced access are also threats. Know the difference between a threat and a vulnerability. Vulnerabilities are known as threats that need to be addressed. Know about the bug bounty programs from a technology vendor. Know that penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, and application scanning are the primary tools for security assessments. Penetration test is the process of activity of attempting to break in or test security controls. Vulnerability scanning is the scanning for specific vulnerabilities. And then application scanning is using tools and human testing on applications. Be familiar with the various tools that are used in security assessments. Nmap for network discovery, Metasploit, and Nessus are for vulnerability scanning, and OWASP is for application scanning. Know the basic three categories for data security and their meaning with examples. Public is data or information that can be shared with anyone inside or outside an organization. Private is the data or information that should not be shared outside an organization and should be kept internal. Sensitive is data or information that is critical to be kept confidential, even inside an organization, to which access is restricted to personnel who have a need to know. Know the principles of the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Know the tools used for confidentiality. Data encryption. This is encrypting data in a manner that allows sending of data to another party so that they can unencrypt it and read. Data sanitation is scrubbing or obfuscating data, which prevents anyone from reading or accessing the data later. Know the tools for integrity. Validation, the process of validating the integrity of data, making sure that the data has not been modified since its creation or the last approved change. Know the tools used for availability, backup and recovery. So backup is the process of copying data to a secure location that is separate from the original location. An RPO is critical for backup. Recovery is the process of copying data from backup location to either the original location or separate restore location. An RTO is critical for recovery. Know that the response to a breach is one of the principles of the CIA. A response may be required for reporting either to a regulatory body or public disclosure. Data may need to be destroyed if it's no longer trustworthy. Communication with a third party may not be trusted anymore. An organization may need to execute its BCP or DR plan. Know auditing and its place in application and infrastructure security. Auditing or logging is critical for application and infrastructure security. It can be both reactive and proactive to events. There are tools provided by CSPs that offer logging not only at the tenant level, but also at the resource level. Know the difference between access and authorization. Access means the rights and permissions to assets that are part of a larger system. Authorization means the rights and permissions to a system as a whole, like a tenant, console, or computer system. Know the rights and permissions that deny trumps all other permissions. So permissions are authorizations to perform actions to an asset that have been granted by an asset owner. Rights are either an authorization or a permission to perform actions on assets as a whole. Any permission or rights that apply and deny will trump any allow rights and permissions, even if explicitly applied later. All right, be sure if you haven't, read the chapter, pages 253 to 302. We'll start with our written lab. Blank is the data category used for press release from an organization that is being sent to the newspapers. This would be public. Blank is the data category used for salaries earned by everyone in the organization. Sensitive. Blank is the data category used for an email sent from HR stating when and where employees can get their flu shots. Private. Blank ensures the privacy or prevents the unauthorized access to assets. Confidentiality. Blank ensures the validity of an asset. Integrity. Blank ensures the timely access of an asset. Availability. Blank are set of steps that should be taken once an event takes place or steps that need to be taken to follow a policy. Procedures. Blank is the process of testing the resolved security issues in a patch that was applied to an organization's software. Vulnerability scanning. Blank is the concept that data is subject to the laws and regulations of a particular nation. Data sovereignty. MPAA is an organization that enforces blank regulations. Industry based. All right, Chapter 7 Review Questions. You just received an email from your CEO announcing a change in health benefits offered to employees. What data category is this an example of? Private. This is an internal email that applies to all employees, so it's private. Your manager has asked you to compose an email that will be sent to potential new clients detailing the availability of SLA and services you offer. You need to gather from internal metrics to provide examples. What data category would the email be an example of? Public. Now, we've had some conversation around this question before, but the reason it's public is because it's an email that's being sent to new clients. So it has to be public. It can't be any other. You are in your manager's office and notice that there's pros and cons list about giving new bonuses to the staff. What data category is this an example of? Sensitive. So not everybody needs to know it, but some people need to know it. PCI DSS requires encryption both at rest and in transit for any communication where credit card number is transmitted to keep it private. What data security principle is this an example of? Confidentiality. The network diagrams have finally been digitalized, and the paper diagrams that have been hanging on the wall can be destroyed. Which data category and data security principles are being used? This is sensitive and confidentiality. You just received an email reporting suspicious activity from the CEO's account. The email provides a link to review the suspicious activity and immediately lock the account. You want to review the suspicious activity before manually locking the CEO's account. So you click the first link. Which data security principle did you just violate? Integrity. A new software patch is available for the organization's firewall. Before proceeding with the software update, you make a copy of the firewall's configuration. Which data security principle are you performing? Availability. You have been working on a new script that will make copies of the firewall configuration before software update. You ask a colleague to review it before running it. The colleague recommends that the script not be run because it would store firewall's admin password in clear text. This is an example of what kind of assessment? Vulnerability scanning. Security assessments that test against known threats and bugs in software that can be cause data corruption are called what? This is vulnerability scanning and application scanning. Security mechanism that should be maintained by groups and not individually and describes the properties of an asset, not the rights of the asset, is authorization. Client for which your organization offers site backups has reported that they have been the victim of ransomware. All of their files and their share network files have been encrypted. They cannot access any files without paying a ransom. What suggestion would you recommend? Recovery. So, what this is implying is that you've done good backups. There's no reason to pay the ransom because you can just recover them. You can restore them from a backup. What's the difference between a threat and a vulnerability? Vulnerabilities have not been mitigated. Threats can be mitigated, but other responses are possible as well. Your manager gave you a new key that allows you to enter the server room anytime you need it. This is a type of access. Your organization's network file share was crypto locked, meaning it was encrypted, and ransom was demanded for access to the files. You were able to recover the files from backup. However, management has requested that you review and lock down access to the file share. They want only authorized individuals to be able to make changes to the entire file share. What is management asking you to perform? Hardening. Use security tools that perform network discovery and are able to list all servers on the network and the services they provide. What are you performing? Penetration test. Blank are proof by third party of compliance with either federal, international, or industry regulations. Certifications. The spreadsheet that has the admin password for the network equipment and at an ISP would be categorized as sensitive. An email between two CEOs about a merger between two organizations with profit sharing numbers is an example of which data category? Sensitive.